Before the story begins, remember this. Some chapters of American history were never recorded in books because the people who lived them prayed those pages would stay buried. But Forgotten Remains does not bury the past. Here, we dig it up, bone by bone. Tonight's descent takes us into Covington, Tennessee, a place where the soil is thick, the secrets are thicker, and one widow's love grew so twisted, so corrupted by loneliness and grief, that even the devil himself refused to take her confession. They called her the Covington Widow, a woman who stood at the edge of sanity until she crossed it, a woman who married her own sons until the truth tore her house apart from the inside. What follows is not for the faint-hearted. If you choose to continue, do so knowing that some stories don't just haunt you, they hold on. Welcome to Forgotten Remains. Darkness settles heavy over the Tennessee lowlands, the kind that clings to the lungs and leaves a taste of iron on the tongue. People say the Covington widow didn't just lose her husband, she lost her mind, and then she lost everything else. But long before the fires, before the disappearances, before the town sealed her farmhouse shut with chains and holy water, the widow was simply a rumor, the kind whispered behind closed doors by women who didn't dare speak her name outside. And yet everyone in Covington remembered the night she walked barefoot into town, her two sons behind her. Silent, expressionless, eyes hollow as if carved from river stones, and all three wearing the same rust-colored marks around their wrists. Most said it looked like dried blood, others said it looked like rope, but the oldest folks swore it looked like a binding mark, the kind worn by couples during old Appalachian marriage rites. No one knew what to believe. They only knew one thing: the widow had changed. Her farmhouse sat at the edge of the Blackwood forest, an old two-story structure leaning like an exhausted traveler, its windows stuffed with rags, its chimney coughing up the smell of burnt herbs long after midnight. Children dared each other to run across the widow's porch. Few made it farther than the gate, for the widow never appeared during daylight anymore. Only at dusk, when the last sliver of sun bled out behind the trees, did she emerge. Always barefoot, always humming something low and trembling, a tune that didn't sound human. Her sons, Elias and Matthew, were never more than a few steps away. Once rowdy boys with rope swings and mud-caked boots, they now moved like shadows tethered to their mother's spine. Some nights, passing farmers swore they saw candles burning in the upstairs windows, strange symbols painted on the glass, figures dancing, slow, stiff, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. Covington had seen its share of frontier madness, but nothing like this. The first real fear settled in when the preacher went missing. He had marched toward the widow's property after Sunday service, Bible tucked under one arm and righteous fury under the other. The widow, he said, was dabbling in something unholy, something that had wrapped itself around her family's bones. He told half the congregation he meant to break her sons free. He never returned. The search party found his Bible 2 days later. The pages shredded, the cover soaked through as if dipped in the blackwater bog behind the widow's house. Not a single footprint, not a single struggle, nothing human left behind. Only a strange symbol carved into the dirt, a looping knotwork circle like a marriage ring turned inside out. By autumn, Covington stopped pretending. Something was happening in that house, something the widow refused to explain, something the townspeople were too afraid to confront. Because every dusk, without fail, the widow walked to the edge of the forest with her sons behind her. She would stand still as a gravestone, facing the dark tree line, murmuring a whisper chant that didn't belong in any church or tongue known to Tennessee. And sometimes, only sometimes, something whispered back. Then came the night the boys began digging. A passing hunter saw it first. Elias and Matthew, gaunt, pale, eyes unfocused, were shoveling into the earth behind the house, shovels striking stone, then wood, then something softer. Not graves. Not exactly. Shallow pits, arranged in a circle, each filled with dried flowers and lengths of braided vine. And in the center, a mound of disturbed earth, large enough to bury a man. The hunter didn't stick around long enough to see more, but he swore the widow stood over them, chanting softly, binding them to the soil with her voice. The sheriff tried to investigate. He never stepped foot inside the house because the front door swung open before he touched it, as if pushed by someone standing just behind it. No one was there. The air inside reeked of burnt sage and old copper. Curtains shredded. Furniture overturned. Symbols painted across every wall, ceiling and floor. And in the middle of the living room sat 3 chairs, arranged in a triangle, facing inward, each holding a braided rope wreath. The sheriff left immediately. He locked the farmhouse from the outside, nailed it shut, and told the town no one was to set foot on that property, not until dawn, not ever. But the widow had other plans. The night of the fire changed everything. No one knew who saw the flames first. Some said the boys set it. Others said the widow lit it herself. But one thing was certain. The blaze didn't burn like a normal fire. It burned blue. And it burned cold. Villagers formed a line to throw water. Buckets splashed. Steam hissed. But the fire didn't dim. It only pulsed like a heartbeat. Through the flickering blue light, they saw movement inside the upstairs window. 3 figures, hands joined, faces blank. The townspeople screamed for them to jump, break the glass, escape. They didn't move, not until the floor collapsed beneath them. The fire vanished as quickly as it came, snuffed out, erased. When the smoke cleared, the house stood blackened but not destroyed. No bodies were found, only 3 sets of footprints leading into the woods and none returning. At the center of the living room, untouched by flame, lay a single object. A twisted ring of braided rope, 3 strands woven together. A marriage knot, not meant for lovers, but for something far older, something that demanded devotion and obedience. Covington tried to forget, but the forest didn't. Some nights, travelers passing through swear they see 3 figures standing between the trees, pale silhouettes hand in hand watching the road. Other nights they hear humming, low and broken, drifting across the fields. And every generation, someone finds that same strange knot carved into the dirt near the old foundations of the widow's house. A binding mark, a marriage vow, a warning. Whatever the widow bound together, she never meant to let go. The forest behind the widow's farmhouse never grew back the same after the fire. Locals said the soil had soured, turned black, twisted, unnatural. Trees that once stood tall now bent inward, their trunks warped as if something beneath the roots had dragged them down. And for years after the blaze, no life returned. No deer. No birds. Not even insects. It was as if the forest held its breath. And then, in 1901, 6 years after the widow and her sons vanished, something broke that silence. It began with the screaming. A farmhand named Joseph Cray was the first to hear it. He was riding through the north field before sunrise, lantern swinging from his saddle, when a sound tore through the tree line, high, thin, and impossibly long. A woman's scream, but stretched, warped, like someone dragging metal across stone. His horse panicked so violently it nearly threw him. Joseph lit the lantern higher, and that was when he saw them. Not clearly, just silhouettes at the forest edge. 3 figures. Very still. Very pale. Their hands seemed to be joined. Joseph blinked once. When he opened his eyes again, the lantern went out. The figures were gone. By noon, the whole town knew. By evening, no one dared step outside. Doors locked. Curtains tight. Lamps burning through the night. Because everyone remembered the old stories. Everyone remembered the fire. Everyone remembered the widow's sons. And the forest had been quiet for too long. On the 3rd night, the knocking began. Not on doors, on windows. Slow, measuring, knuckle-tapping glass. Tap, tap, tap. Always 3 taps. Always at dusk. Children cried in their beds. Men sat with rifles across their knees. Women whispered prayers through trembling lips. But every person who heard the tapping said the same thing. The sound wasn't coming from human knuckles. It was softer. Hollow, like someone knocking with rope-wrapped fingers. Then the footprints appeared. The sheriff, now an old man who had long since retired, forced himself to ride out at dawn. He followed the tapping reports house by house until he found them. 3 sets of prints, side by side, trailing through the frost-covered dirt. Each print was bare, each perfectly shaped, each wrong. The toes pointed backward. But what froze the sheriff's blood solid was not the direction of the tracks, but where they led. Right back into the Blackwood forest. Straight toward the burnt remains of the widow's farmhouse. The sheriff cursed himself for coming. He prayed he was losing his mind. But he kept riding until the wreckage appeared through the trees, just a charred outline now, swallowed by vines and rot. But the front door was no longer nailed shut. It had been opened. On its own. The sheriff dismounted, boots crunching through frost, breath shaking like a trapped animal. "Lord help me," he whispered, stepping inside. The smell hit first, wet earth, old rope, and something metallic. The living room remained just as he left it years ago, except for one small detail. The marriage knot made of braided rope was gone. In its place lay something new. A fresh knot. Tighter. Stronger. Wet with morning dew. 3 strands woven together, but this time each strand had hair entangled in it. Human hair. 2 dark. 1 grey. The sheriff stumbled back, bile rising, but before he could flee, a whisper stirred behind him. "You shouldn't have come alone." The voice was thin, peppery, female. Too close. He spun. No one. Just dust drifting through a shaft of pale light. He backed toward the doorway, hands shaking when he saw the writing on the wall. Not painted. Scratched deep into the charred wood. "We are not done." Then something moved in the doorway. 3 silhouettes. Holding hands. The sheriff dropped his lantern and ran. By dawn he reached the town. Hat lost. Coat torn. Skin grey and eyes wild as a hunted animal. He never spoke again. Not one word. He died a week later, with his fists clenched so tight they had to break his fingers to open his hands. Inside each fist was a length of braided rope. 3 strands. Twisted together. After his death, Covington wanted answers. They gathered at the church. They argued. They raised torches and rifles and fear. They demanded truth. But one woman, the midwife who had delivered both of the widow's sons, spoke above the shouting. Her voice trembled. The widow was not touched by grief, she whispered. She was touched by something older. Something that wanted her sons bound to it. Something she invited. Silence fell heavy. The midwife continued. She didn't marry those boys. She bound them. And once bound, it doesn't let go. Someone asked what it was. She didn't answer. She only pointed toward the forest. And that night, as the town huddled together in terror, the bells at the old church tower began to ring. Not by human hands. 3 chimes. Slow. Deep. Echoing across the fields. A warning. A summons. A promise. Whatever the widow had bound, it was walking again. Covington didn't sleep after the church bells rang. Not a candle was blown out. Not a lock was left checked once. People sat with their backs to the walls, rifles on their knees, staring at their doors as if expecting them to be kicked open at any second. Because those 3 chimes weren't random. They were a signal. And everyone remembered what the widow used to whisper in town years before she vanished. 3 binds make the vow. 3 nights seal it. 3 returns complete it. No one understood her then. Now they did. Something had returned to finish what she started. At dawn, a thick fog slid in from the woods, dense, colorless, swallowing fences, barns, and finally the entire town square. It didn't drift like normal fog. It moved. Coiled. Pulled along the ground like something alive. And through the fog, footsteps. Not the heavy stomp of boots. Not the quick patter of animals. Soft. Bare. 3 sets. Perfectly in sync. The townspeople hid behind shutters, pressing hands over their children's mouths. The fog crept along the streets, and the footsteps grew louder, slow, measured, as if whatever walked there didn't need to hurry. Someone whispered, "They're looking for someone." But no one dared ask who. The footsteps stopped at the church. The old bell tower groaned. A rope tightened by itself, and the bell tolled once more. 3 times. Slow. Deep. Dragging. A final call. The fog recoiled from the church steps like it was afraid of crossing the threshold. Then something darker than fog stepped forward. A figure. A woman. Barefoot. Black dress tattered like strips of shadow hanging off bone. The Covington Widow. But she wasn't as she had been. Her hair hung in clumps. Her skin was washed out, wax-like. Her eyes were sunken pits brimming with black tears. And behind her stood her sons, Elias and Matthew, but wrong. Their faces slack, skin grey as drowned corpses, eyes empty and reflective, catching every flicker of light and stretching it unnaturally across their pupils. Each boy held a rope, not a noose, a braid. 3 strands woven tight, fresh, wet, The widow raised a trembling, rigid arm toward the church doors. "They broke the vow," she whispered, voice cracking like burnt wood. "Now the forest comes to collect." The church doors burst inward, as if shoved by a hurricane. The fog poured through the aisles. Candles died in a chorus of hisses. Inside, the congregation screamed, but it wasn't just fear this time. They could see the widow now, not as a woman, but as something wearing the shape of one. Her shadow on the church wall split into three, each shape twitching independently, each holding a rope made of hair, vine, and something that looked too much like veins. The widow stepped forward. "You severed our binds," she said. "You hid your dead. You buried what was not yet buried." She lifted her fingers. The ropes her sons held tightened on their own, as if pulled by unseen hands. Some of the older townsfolk collapsed on their knees. They knew the truth. They knew what the town had done to stop the widow 6 years ago, what they had buried in the forest, what they had lied about, what they had hoped would never crawl its way back. And the widow had come to finish the ritual. To break a vow, she said, is to break the living. Panic erupted. Men fired rifles. Shotgun blasts thundered through the church. But the bullets didn't hit flesh. They hit fog, passing straight through the silhouettes as if shooting at smoke. The widow smiled. Her sons stepped forward. Elias reached the nearest farmer. The farmer screamed, body arching, limb spasming. His shadow ripped from the floor as if torn from his feet, sucked into the boy's open hand. His body fell limp. His shadow disappeared. Matthew approached the preacher's wife. She stumbled back, whispering prayers until her voice cracked. Matthew touched her cheek. Her breath turned to frost midair. Her eyes rolled white. She fell where she stood, frozen stiff. The church became a killing ground. But outside the church, someone watched from the fog. A child. 9-year-old Thomas Keller slipped out through a broken window, sprinting across fields toward the forest. He didn't know why. He didn't know where he was going. Only that something, some memory he didn't remember having, pulled him toward the burnt farmhouse. He reached it breathless. The ruins were dark, silent, but something soft glowed beneath the collapsed staircase, a faint light pulsing like a heartbeat. Thomas crouched. A knot, a rope braid, lying on the earth, but this knot wasn't like the others. This one was unraveling, loosening, strands falling apart. A broken vow. Thomas reached toward it, and a voice rose behind him. "Child, leave it." He froze. Standing behind him was the midwife, the same old woman who had delivered the widow's sons. Her eyes gleamed with an emotion Thomas couldn't name. "Do you know what she bound to them?" she asked. Thomas shook his head. The midwife knelt beside him. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "She did not marry her sons. She gave them to something older, a spirit too ancient for names. It promised her life beyond death. In exchange, she had to bind her bloodline to it." Thomas swallowed. "What happens if the knot breaks?" he whispered. The midwife looked at him with fear. "If the knot breaks," she said, "the spirit dies, and the widow with it." Thomas didn't hesitate. He grabbed the knot with both hands and pulled. The rope unraveled in a violent snap, strands whipping apart. The forest exhaled a deep guttural groan. Wind howled through the trees. And in the distance, a scream. The widow's scream. In the church, the widow staggered. Her bones cracked like splitting branches. Her pale arms convulsed as if pulled by giant invisible hooks. Her sons collapsed in unison, their shadows snapping back to the floor, their bodies turning rigid and skeletal. The ropes they held turned to dust. The fog recoiled. The church windows shattered outward. The widow reached toward the forest, face twisting in terror. "No. The vow, the vow." Her words choked mid-scream. Her body twisted inward, collapsing like an empty coat. She hit the church floor with the softness of falling ash. Silence. Then the fog vanished. Gone, as if it had never existed. By morning, the church was quiet. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Those who survived whispered in shock. The widow's sons were found curled at the front pew, skeletal, long dead. Impossible. But true. The widow herself was nothing but a stain on the floorboards, a human shape burned into the wood. No spirit. No fog. No return. The vow was broken. They burned the farmhouse and salted the earth. Thomas and the midwife told no one what happened. And Covington moved on? Or tried to. because some nights when the fog drifts low across the blackwood, 3 faint chimes echo over the fields. Not loud, not dangerous, just a reminder. Vows can be broken, but they can also be remade. If you made it this far, you've walked deeper into the shadows than most dare to go. The Covington Widow's house may be gone, but her screams still linger in the Tennessee wind, a reminder that evil doesn't always hide in the forest. Sometimes it sleeps under your own roof. And the next story waiting in these forgotten archives? It's darker, older, and far more dangerous. If you want to keep digging with us, subscribe to Forgotten Remains, where the dead never stay silent and the truth is always colder than the grave. Until next time, lock your doors, trust no one, and remember, some families keep secrets that should never be uncovered.